The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Questions from Patrons, February 2021. So I realized it had been a while since I actually did this. I do my best to engage, but sometimes the messages from the Patreon system either don't get to me or they get lost with the emails and everything else. And sometimes I don't necessarily have answers, but I wanted to go through. I think I've got like, it's hard to, because there are multiple paragraphs. I think there's like 5 or 6 questions here to get to from patrons. Some of them are really simple answers and some of them require a little bit more expounding. So let's do it. One of the patrons wrote, when talking about to other people about the 10 Commandments, they will always say, but it says thou shalt not kill in the 10 Commandments. This is in response to an issue about talking about abortion. So they say it says thou shalt not kill in the 10 Commandments, which leads to the argument about everything they don't like in the Old Testament not really counting because those things relate to Jewish cultural requirements rather than the real commandments. Have you done a video on the 10 Commandments or on the tablets that Moses broke versus the bajillion other commandments? Not specifically. I will add that to the growing list of Bible videos to do. But it almost doesn't matter because when you take a look at the 10 Commandments, the popular versions of them, 5 of them are essentially, love the Lord thy God and all these things that are religious prescriptions that aren't about what to do or what not to do. And then you get to things like, don't lie, don't steal, honor your father and mother, blah, blah, blah. If they're going to look at this as if the Bible says don't kill, and that's my position against abortion, I'd recommend that, it's surprising that they don't go to the passage in Jeremiah where it says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Although it would be nice to point out to them and everybody else who uses that passage that it's one of the only times that that's ever mentioned. And that's talking to Jeremiah, and it may or may not apply to everyone else. And even if it does, that would suggest that you existed prior to being in the womb. And so it's talking about something other than the physical you. At the end of the day, though, I don't care what the Bible or any other religion or any other book happens to say about abortion. My position on abortion is really simple, and that is the pregnant person has bodily autonomy and no one can force them to remain pregnant against their will. It's difficult. I know they're going to go to various things, but if they're going to look at abortion and say, but the Bible says thou shalt not kill, then they must be consistent with on capital punishment with that. And I know what their answer is. Well, it says thou shalt not kill, but it also allows you to put people to death and eye for an eye and everything else. So they're just dodging around, cherry picking the verses that they feel support their position. And at the end of the day, it doesn't make any difference what the Bible says. This question came in just the other day. It says, hi, Matt, I heard about Texas power grid issues and hope you and the atheist community are doing all right. I did a bunch of updates on Facebook, so I'm not going to belabor the point here. I was frozen in my house for better part of a week, and then it was 70 degrees. I didn't lose power, but many people in the atheist community of Austin did. Some of them were living in their car. There were a number of us working behind the scenes to try to connect people because they lost power, they lost internet, although they would have their phone. People were living in their car. They didn't have heat. And we managed to get some people moved to other people's houses. It was difficult because I have a house where I could have had a number of people come over and stay. And yes, pandemic be damned. If people are going to freeze to death, I don't care about a pandemic in that instance. Let's triage appropriately. I wanted people to come and stay at my house. Unfortunately, there was a sheet of ice, and I'm on the outside edge of town. Austin doesn't have the infrastructure to deal with it. Short version is I survived. I was just fine. As far as I know, everybody else is fine and has power back. We are still dealing with water issues from pipes busting, but I'm not on boil notice. And I appreciate the concern from everybody. No, there's not anything anybody else can do, and we're not taking donations or anything right now. Support the disaster organizations, and we'll see what we can do here. Next question, it says, often it comes up that you say something is immoral, and then the apologist essentially says, you don't have a foundation to judge, and at least sometimes you basically just assert that you do. I'm thinking taking a quick 60 seconds very early on in most debates to clearly present your moral framework would be extremely compelling. For example, something quick like the below. Morality is a complex subject. However, a succinct potential framework is that morality evaluates the actions and intentions that provide the greatest well-being for the most conscious entities over time. Using this rough subjective framework, we can then objectively evaluate any moral agent's actions with a rough calculus. While imperfect, we can, for example, confidently state that the instructively Scolding a child for a mishap is vastly more moral than mercilessly slaughtering them, all else being equal. In this secular moral system, we can also easily know, for example, that stoning gay men to death is immoral, despite what holy books written long ago might say, for example, Leviticus 20:13. Further, the Bible explicitly condoning slavery is immoral. And even if it wasn't realized in ancient time, because it allowed for systems of significant net dehumanization and abuse. Yes, thank you for doing all that work and making the suggestion. The problem is this. We know that's going to come up, and you are right to try to find a way to curtail that. And I wish that it would be as simple as adding something like this statement in at the top of every debate that might end up in a discussion about morality. The unfortunate truth, though, is that there often isn't time. And quite frankly, the moral frame, this isn't going to stop them from saying anything, from objecting to my moral framework. Telling them what my moral framework is doesn't matter, because they're going to object to it no matter what. They're still going to say, I don't have a framework, or I'm having to borrow from a Christian worldview, or something along those lines. You're absolutely right that we should be doing a better job of defining our terms, but time is critical in a debate. And while I would try maybe something a little shorter than this, the problem is that if I put this in a debate that's not specifically about morality, then it makes the debate about morality. And if I'm doing a debate about actual moral foundation, then I don't need this framework at the beginning. I need that to be the whole debate. So I don't know that I'm that worried about how many times I might do a debate like, is biblical slavery moral? Because when we did that debate, I didn't have to define any framework. They were just sitting there saying, oh, what's in the Bible isn't slavery and it's not immoral. And this tap dance, I would rather point out the tap dance and do it reflexively to what they say, rather than just starting off every debate with a boilerplate morality. What might be good is to put out a video that is, here's 2 minutes on my moral framework, and then send that to every debate opponent and say, if you're just going to fisk this, if you're just going to go line by line and pick it apart, then we should have a debate on morality. But if you're not going to do that, and we're going to have a discussion about whether or not something is moral, then I would like you to at least understand my moral framework, so that you don't walk in and say, well, you don't have a moral framework, when I do. And instead, you could have a better objection, which is your moral framework isn't consistent with God's, in which case you would be correct, and I don't give a damn. So thanks for that question and that suggestion. Somebody sent in a meta question that is, what if all of us are wrong about how God works and it affects our daily life? How would that affect your theology? And also, I wanted to see if I could do a bit of let's have a conversation through recordings, Doctor Who thing by predicting reactions. Note that I pipelined the second question before the cutoff, so at least that worked. Sorry for making you facepalm. I'm not an atheist. I'm a deist. But I think we need to cordon off memeplexes like Precept and Young Earth Creationists, lest they wreck our species, and I thank you for doing that. I don't hear a lot from deists, and there's proportions of your question that you framed that I don't know that I understand correctly because of how it's worded. So anybody who was confused while I was reading it, the confusion may be mine. But that interesting meta question to ask theists, atheists, deists, what if all of us are wrong about how God works? Well, I don't think that God works at all, because I don't think that God exists and doesn't do any work. But if I'm wrong about that, then in my case, there should be evidence to show that I'm wrong. You'd be really simple. Show me a God. Show me a God interacting. Show me a God doing things and interacting with people in the way that other people think they do, and I will change my mind. For the other individuals who think that God does all those things, they could easily demonstrate it, provided they had actual evidence for it. And so the what-if questions, while sometimes interesting, don't always get us as far as we might think they would. And this is the last one, and it's a long one. I want to read most of it to you because it's a rarity, and I get asked about this quite a lot. It starts off, says, I was a Muslim. Thanks to you and your shows, I no longer believe in things that don't present good evidence for their claims. I'm pretty sure I've watched all, if not most, of your YouTube Atheist Experience shows over the last 2 to 3 years. I just want to reinforce that they do reach people out in the world and help us see the light, especially the discussions with Muslim callers. I'm now an ex-Muslim and happy. I want to pause there before I reach the rest of that. We do, in fact, hear from Muslims and ex-Muslims. I've worked with various ex-Muslims in the past. But for someone to email and say that our show, especially the very few calls that we have with Muslims, helped them, and they're now an ex-Muslim and happy, makes all of this worth it. And a huge thank you to both the viewers of the show, the supporters of the show, but also to the patrons, of which this individual is now a member. And so the contributions that you guys make to this Patreon project that allow me to keep doing this as my primary job, allow me to have the conversations, some of them that you're not ever going to see, which I regret, because sometimes conversations happen with people and they don't want it public, even though other people would benefit from it. And so I don't often get to share some of the stories because they're not my stories to share. In this case, this gentleman wrote, I'm sure you get a lot of these messages, but please add one more to your collection. I've been meaning to send this message for a very long time. A very sincere and massive thanks for your efforts in helping me overcome deep Islamic indoctrination. The reason for this message was actually twofold. I was hoping to get your advice on how to break it to my family. I'm in the process of explaining the above to my religious parents. This will go down as you expect. They will have questions, and although I feel I have the answers now, or sensible arguments, I was wondering if you had any advice or direction to Islam-specific claims that I can use as a resource. Now, I'm going to pause here. There's a little bit more, and I'll get to it. I have no real expertise in the specifics of Islam, but the claims still follow the same pattern as theistic claims in general. It's not like a cosmological argument is necessarily Christian. If the argument is this, therefore there is some God, that God may well be consistent with both Islam and Christianity and others. And so all of those conversations about teleological arguments and moral arguments and anything that isn't specifically Christian also applies to Islam as well. You don't even have to know the arguments. All you need to know and understand is where the burden of proof rests, how to get people to acknowledge and accept that they have a burden of proof. And the easiest way is to just assert that they're wrong. And when they say prove it, you go, aha, see, you're claiming I'm wrong. You better prove it. Well, you're claiming you're right. You better prove it. If you'll at least acknowledge that neither of us can prove anything, then we should stop talking about it. But he goes on to the specific argument that they're going to use. Premise 1, God is truthful. Premise 2, the Quran is from God. Therefore, the Quran is the truth and all within it is fact. So, first of all, they have no way to demonstrate or no reason to think that there is a God or that God is truthful. And even if there were a God that was truthful, the fact that the God wrote a book doesn't mean that the book is necessarily accurate. Just like I can be truthful and still get something wrong. I could also be truthful and still lie or omit something or lie in vague notions. But if their thing is, they're going to say God is perfectly truthful. God is always truthful. The Quran comes from God or Allah, and therefore the Quran is truth and all within is fact. That would be a valid and sound argument if, in fact, the premises were true, but they haven't demonstrated the premise. They haven't demonstrated that God is. They haven't demonstrated that God is truthful, and they haven't demonstrated that the Quran is from God. These are all just bald assertions. Or here's another one. Muhammad, the prophet, is truthful. He spoke to God, got the Quran is truth, etc. Well, I don't know that Muhammad was truthful at all. That's just another assertion. And so this all boils down to a circular argument, which this person notes. Here's the final line from the email. Or some variation of the circular arguments above. If you had some advice, it'd be very much appreciated. I thank you for writing. You are on the right track. The fact that you've identified that these arguments are circular in that the very thing they're trying to prove is assumed. If you're trying to prove that a God exists and you begin with God is truthful, God is. You've already stated at the beginning that God is truthful, which means God is, which means the very thing you're trying to prove must be the case, except that all you did was assume it. It's difficult to teach people how to recognize fallacies, and in particular, circular reasoning when it's not obvious. Because for someone who's a believer, for the average Muslim, God is truthful is just a truth that they accept. And I did a video about the dirty little truth about logical syllogisms. And that is, they're sound not when the premises are true, but when the premises are accepted. And so if they accept that God is truthful and they accept that the Quran is God, then they should in fact believe that the Quran is the truth. That follows from the premises. The problem is, why do they believe that God is truthful? Aha! Do they believe it because of the Quran? Because now, if the goal is to try to show that the Quran is truthful, then you have to assume that it's truthful in order to show that God is truthful, in order for the Quran to be truthful. And there's where you get to your circular argument. Instead of focusing on naming fallacies or even identifying fallacies, keep asking them questions. Well, how do you know that God is truthful? Oh, you read it in the Quran? Oh, well, but you're trying to say that the Quran is true because God is truthful when it's the Quran that told you that it's truthful. I could write a book that says I'm always truthful. And if you believe the book that I'm always truthful, then you should then believe the book that I'm always truthful, which means you should believe that I'm always truthful and that the book that I wrote is always truthful. If you do it like that and don't try to be a dick about it, you're likely to make some progress, but don't feel bad if you don't. My parents continue to believe. We've had conversations. Dan Barker's parents, on the other hand, after some conversations, stopped believing. Maybe you're never going to change their mind. Maybe somebody else will. Maybe you can point them to information, but don't push it, because if it looks like, hey, mom, dad, I want you to go watch this video and listen to this guy and listen to this girl, do this thing here and all this, it looks like you've just bought into some other religion rather than you've discovered that you didn't have good reason to believe yours in the first place. I hope that's helpful. If not, reach out again, and I'll try and do patron submitted questions a little more often. There's been a lot going on, but please take care of yourself. See you next time. Bye-bye.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.